Happy Thanksgiving week. I hope you have a lot of fun this weekend and eat some grub, watch some football, and of course, dominate in your fantasy matchups. But without further ado, let's not waste some time. Let's check our work. On your screen now is our results from last Friday's video. Of course, we always like to check our work. On the right side of your screen, here, if you see a green strip, we got it right. Red strip, of course, wrong. And yellow, I guess you can argue it's in the middle. Of course, on the left side of your screen, that is the list of names we talked about in depth in last Friday's video. Out of the 12 players or so, I'd say we got about 7 right, 1 in the middle, and of course, 4 wrong. Starting here with the Detroit Lions, let's start with the obvious. We're starting the Amon-Ra, the Jahmyr Gibbs, and the David Montgomerys in this matchup. Those are obvious, right? Let's get those out of the way. But for Jared Goff and Sam Laporta, I'm going to start these guys this weekend, even though it's not so obvious. But for Jared Goff, simply put, he's home in this matchup, so I'm going to start him. Even though it's a tough matchup against the Packers, and the fact that Jared Goff just threw 3 interceptions. For reference, Jared Goff at home this year has averaged about 20 to 23 fantasy points per game. But on the road, he only averages about 14. So Jared Goff is much more comfortable at home. Of course, that's given. But of course, he also has a history of dominating on Thanksgiving the last 2 years with the Detroit Lions. So first surefire, start Jared Goff this weekend if I can talk. But his teammate Sam Laporta, on the other hand, since the bye week, he's been on a cold stretch, no doubt about it. But this is still the tight end 5 on the season. And this is also a guy that has had 3 games with 20 plus points this season, and 5 games with 12 plus points this season as well. This is a perfect bounce back game for Sam Laporta, and I think he finds the end zone once, or I'd say 1 or 2 times for the Detroit Lion offense. But moving over to the Packers, I'm going to be sitting every single Green Bay Packer aside from one. So we're sitting the Jordan Love, the A.J. Dillons, Christian Watsons of the world. We're also going to be sitting the Jaden Reed and the Luke Musgraves of the world. It is worth note that Jaden Reed has had a chest injury, and all the reports say that he's just not breathing the right way. I'm sure he'll be limited in the short week matchup against the Detroit Lions. And then for Luke Musgrave, he's having an abdominal / spleen injury, so he might be limited in this matchup as well. Again, coming off of a short week. But for Romeo Doubs, he's the only Packer I would start in this matchup. As you see his numbers in the top left of your screen, not the greatest, I get it. However, in 3 of his last 4 games, he's put up 12 plus points with more consistent volume than he's seen all season. With Aaron Jones out in this matchup, and with Jaden Reed and Luke Musgrave banged up, they might not even play in this game. I just love the Romeo Doubs start, as he's going to be Jordan Love's go-to guy in this matchup. Maybe even Deontay Wicks, but for surefire, I would start Romeo Doubs in this matchup against the Detroit Lions. But the next matchup is the Dallas Cowboys and the Washington Commanders, starting here with the favorite in the Dallas Cowboys. The obvious, I'm going to be starting Dak, I'm going to be starting CeeDee. That is maybe the best stack in fantasy right now. Well, I guess there's kind of no argument about it. But I'm also going to be starting Tony Pollard here, and I'm going to, bypass that one because, again, he was a first-round pick in our fantasy drafts. He just had a pretty good game last week against the Carolina Panthers. Roll with the momentum. I think Dallas will get up early in this game. I think they'll get up big early, and I think Tony Pollard can have a big second half in this matchup. But for Brandon Cooks and Jake Ferguson, they're kind of in question because they're kind of guys that, you don't really want to start them, but they can have big weeks. And I'm going to actually start both of these guys this week, of course, unless you have other elite options. But for Brandon Cooks, Washington, and this defense, of course, they're going against, has allowed the most schedule-adjusted fantasy points to wide receivers this season, and specifically the most yards on deep passes, which, again, where Brandon Cooks, that's his specialty. That's where he, no pun intended, where he cooks. So I would start Brandon Cooks this week. And then on the flip side, Jake Ferguson, Washington is a middle-of-the-pack defense against the tight end position. However, I think Fergie has been on a tear as of late, as over the last 4 weeks, he's averaged 14 fantasy points per game, and he's the tight end 5 in that span. I think Dallas gets up big early in this game, like I mentioned, and I think both of these guys can score an early touchdown in this matchup. However, if we do have to worry that if the second half, if it is a blowout, these guys might not see a lot of production. However, Dallas has had a history this season to just keep the foot on the pedal against these divisional matchups, just like they did against the Giants a couple weeks back. They just kept pouring it on late in that game. So who knows? Even if it's a blowout, these guys can still be fantasy relevant. For Washington in this matchup, however, I'm going to be starting Brian Robinson. I think he's a must start at this point. Despite the tough matchup, you kind of have to hope he gets a lot of receptions, just like he did a few weeks ago. But then a sleeper start this week, I think it's going to be Logan Thomas. So if you need a tight end, maybe if Mark Andrews went down for you, Logan Thomas could be a sleeper start this weekend. But I'm going to be sitting Sam Howell, Terry McLaurin, Curtis Samuel, and Jahan Dotson. So basically Sam Howell and the Washington wide receivers. For Sam Howell, he's actually been very solid this season. He's averaging around 19 to 20 fantasy points per game. However, he's only really faced one tough and good defense this season. And in that matchup against the Buffalo Bills, which was the only good defense he's faced, he was only held to 4.5 fantasy points. This is the second good defense that Sam Howell has faced this season, and I think it can be another rough outing for Mr. Howell. I do think Dallas gets up big, like I've mentioned, and that's going to force Washington to throw a lot in this game. And you would think Sam Howell is going to be throwing 40 plus times. It's hard for him not to put up fantasy points. However, quantity doesn't always lead to quality, and of course in this case we're talking about fantasy points for Sam Howell. I'd steer in a different direction with no teams on bye this weekend. There shouldn't be a reason you have to start Sam Howell. Now for Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson, again the Washington wide receivers, the Cowboys secondary, they've allowed the third fewest points to wide receivers this season. They're also one of the best defenses, of course, at generating pressure. We know Dan Quinn loves that man press, blitz style of defense. And Sam Howell, I mean, he's the worst protected quarterback in the NFL. So Dallas can get after him and get after him a lot in this matchup. Even though Washington has to throw a lot in this game, again, that gives an outside shot for Terry McLaurin or one of these wide receivers to have an okay day. However, given that no teams have buys, I would steer in another direction, and that's really what it boils down to. I think not only can Dallas win this game big, I think they can win it. It can get ugly is a good way to put it. So I would go with a different route if you can, given your depth. But in the Seattle and San Fran matchup, the last Thanksgiving Day matchup, simply put, I didn't even make a graphic for the 49ers. We're starting your 49ers. So your Brock Purdy's of the world, your CMC, your Debos, your Brandon Ayuk's, and of course your George Kittle. We're starting all of the 49ers this week. That offense is back and maybe better than ever. But for Seattle, on the other hand, I'm going to be starting some of the wide receivers in this matchup. DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, who I think Tyler Lockett could be a top 5 wide receiver this weekend. And of course, I'm going to be starting Zach Charbonnet if Ken Walker III is going to be out this weekend. As again, short week, Ken Walker has that ankle injury, and we talked about it on Wednesday. Zach Charbonnet is a must pick up this week and start this week, even though it's a tough matchup against the 49ers. However, for all of their weapons leader in Geno Smith, he hasn't kind of rekindled that magic from last season as far as fantasy-wise at least. But this weekend, he's facing the third best defense against quarterbacks, and he's going to be facing this defense 2 out of the next 3 weeks. Geno Smith has a very rough schedule the next couple of weeks as he faces the 49ers, Dallas, and then the 49ers yet again. So even though I like some of the receiving options in this game for the Seattle Seahawks, we know that the receiving options their points add up a lot quicker than the quarterback position. And I think Geno can have a solid, 8 to 12 point day. It's just not solid enough for me to start him in this matchup against the 49ers. Basically, again, his floor is extremely low. So if you have another option, please start that other option against the 49ers. And then in the final matchup, the first ever Friday game in the NFL, it's kind of hard to believe that it's the only Friday night game we've ever had in the NFL. However, it is the Miami Dolphins and the New York Jets. For the Jets, it's very simple. We're going to start Breece Hall despite Tim Boyle being the quarterback. I think that can actually lead to a lot of receptions for Breece Hall. And then we're going to sit everybody else. And yes, sit Garrett Wilson this weekend. It's just, it's too much to rely on Tim Boyle to be a fantasy relevant quarterback. At least we're at a point where he has to prove it to us, is a good way to put it. I think it could be a lot of dink and dunk offense. Sure, Garrett Wilson can maybe find himself having a decent day. However, to me, I would start Breece Hall and sit everybody else. Maybe Tyler Conklin could be a sneaky sleeper start there. But for the Dolphins in this matchup, the obvious here, we're starting Raheem Mostert with no Devon Achane, and we're starting Tyreek Hill, of course, because it is Tyreek Hill. But as far as sitting in this matchup, we're going to sit Tua Tagovailoa, as much as it pains me to say, and one of his best receivers in Jalen Waddle. For Tua, he has yet to put up more than 15 fantasy points in any of his 4 road games since week 1, which was not really against the defense in the LA Chargers. But in those games, he's only thrown 4 touchdowns in 4 road games and 3 interceptions. So not very productive fantasy days on the road for Mr. Tua Tagovailoa. He now faces a Jets defense that has the fewest schedule adjusted fantasy points to quarterbacks this season. So if you have an alternative to me, luckily I have Kyler in the one league I have Tua. I would go with that alternative, right? So Tua, this is coming from a guy that has a team named after him on a 9-2 team. I'm sitting Tua this weekend in this matchup against the Jets, going with an alternative. In my case, it is Kyler Murray. But for Jalen Waddle, it's been an up and down year for Jalen Waddle managers, and that's kind of a reason why I traded him away. But this week, no doubt, should be a down for Jalen Waddle managers, as only the elite wide receivers of the world, the CeeDee Lambs, the Stephon Diggs of the world, have had success against this Jets defense and this Jets secondary. And though Jalen Waddle should be, and he is talented enough to be a number 1 wide receiver, he's just not used like that in this offense. And simply put, he's just not the number 1 wide receiver in an offense that has Tyreek Hill. So I would sit Jalen Waddle and play an alternative if you have the depth. Again, if you're in a situation where you started, maybe you went running back or tight end heavy in your drafts, and Jalen Waddle was drafted to be a number 1, well, you might be forced to play him, and it might not be a bad play. However, I just think there's a lot more wide receivers with a lot more upside this weekend. But that's going to do it here for today's video. Again, if you enjoyed, drop a like, subscribe to the channel. Again, happy Thanksgiving, but we're on the road to 5K, so if you can help us get there, I'd be very grateful. Again, I want to thank you guys all for the support for this channel. Over the last year or so, we have gained, again, almost 5,000 subscribers in 1 year. That's an insane accomplishment, and I can't have done any of it without you guys. But without further ado, good luck this weekend in fantasy football. Good luck to your real-life teams. And, of course, eat a lot of food. Enjoy the family time. And until Tuesday, stay happy, stay healthy, get out of here.